The Netflix original show Sweet Tooth follows some common traditions of a Netflix original. It's got diversity, the black support character, female empowerment, the LGBTQ character, and a first for Netflix, it even has some positive messages about male empowerment.
I'm glad there aren't that many men left.
Me too.
The show takes place after an event that changed the world forever called the Great Crumble. The event was triggered when a deadly virus spread across the world, killing a lot of people, causing humanity's day-to-day to completely change and involve some familiar routines like quarantining, wearing masks, and social distancing.
Sounds familiar?
Does sound very familiar.
So much for escapism. The big draw of the show isn't exactly this whole virus thing. In fact, the idea of a virus killing people is just used as a vehicle to tell a more unique story that, at least for the first season, seems to have a loose connection to the virus. The show's big draw is the concept of hybrids, a mix between humans and animals that were born around the same time as the virus.
What the fuck?
And by the way, if you're new to this channel, make sure to hit on the like button, it really helps me out with the YouTube algorithms, and consider subscribing and hitting the bell notification icon for more content. So let's get this going. Our show starts with Gus, also known as Sweet Tooth, who's a half human, half deer hybrid. Gus's whole journey in needing to find a place where he belongs, and then realizing that he's found it when he becomes imprisoned with other hybrids like him, is both beautiful and also hella depressing. It's like having very fond memories of playing with the mailman as a child. But as you get older, you realize that mailmen don't usually go inside people's homes. And then you later find out this whole time that the mailman wasn't visiting your house to play with you. He was just banging your mom while your dad was away.
I thought I meant something to you.
I'm gonna mostly focus on how Gus's character develops throughout the show and how some elements that are introduced sometimes seem to either ignore the character's roots or have no clear direction on where to go next. So let's start from the beginning.
Some stories start at the beginning.
The show starts with Gus and his dad in a cabin in the middle of a forest, isolated from everyone else. We are also introduced to Dr. Singh and his wife, whom I'll refer to as Team Brown Town. Dr. Singh's wife got infected by the H5G9 virus, which eventually motivates the doctor to work on finding a cure. Though I won't be focusing too much on them in this video. We see that Pubba teaches Gus how to cook, how to farm, and how to survive. And it's indicated that they've been living like this for about 10 years. The show also implies that Gus lived completely alone for a whole year after Pubba passed away. This establishes one critical part of Gus's character. He's capable of surviving alone in a forest. For a character that lived in the wilderness for almost a year, I'm gonna take a guess here and say that one of the most important things he has learned is how to ration food. Which makes the next decision that Gus makes in episode 2 seem kinda nonsensical and not in line with the character's roots. In episode 2, Gus travels with the big man in hopes that he'd help get him to Colorado. Because bad things can happen if you're traveling alone as a 10-year-old boy.
You just crossed the fucking line.
As they're traveling, Gus and the big man decide to take a break and rest for the night. Gus is feeling hungry, so while the big man is sleeping, he decides to eat all of the big man's food, including all his pills. This decision completely ignores the character's roots. Regardless of how hungry he is, it makes no sense for this character to eat all the food in one night, since rationing food is very likely to be one of the first things he learned living alone in the forest. This ignores Gus's roots in that he's capable of surviving alone in a forest, and instead establishes that he's just a dumb kid.
Are you stupid?
Yes.
The show also introduces Gus's connection with deer. We see it in episode 1 where he feels that this deer is his mom, and in episode 2 when he sees the deer's head mounted on a wall. In a later scene, a few poachers invade the cabin that Gus is in, and just before the poacher is able to kidnap Gus, a massive deer appears behind Gus, intimidating the poacher that's trying to capture him. Which leads us to this big reveal. When Gus is in trouble, a deer nearby may be able to sense that and try to help him. Does this mean that whenever Gus is in trouble, some giant deer will show up in the future? What exactly is this ability going to lead up to? The problem is this is the only time that we get to see Gus's connection to deer play out. It definitely made for a really cool scene, but we never really see anything like this again. So Gus's connection to deer seems to not really serve a purpose beyond beyond that one scene. At least not in the first season. As we head on to later episodes, we're introduced to the character of Bear.
Some are born to follow, and some are born to lead.
Do I need to remind you who's in charge? The rest is up to me.
She's the leader.
Yeah, I got that.
Bear is the leader of an organization of young kids that I'll refer to as Team Gen Z. We also see Bear and Gus meet for the first time until the big man takes him away. Meanwhile, in suburbia, Team Browntown goes to a party, and although it's unclear, it's implied that the wife has spread the H5G9 virus to the owner of the house, Doug, and for some reason the only way to contain the virus is to burn Doug's entire home with him in it. You'd think Team Brown would have been scarred for life after that. But it's okay, because literally the next day after that, they got Pop-Tarts, baby.
Oh. Where did you find Pop-Tarts?
Too early for Pop-Tarts? Too early for Pop-Tarts?
Crazy good!
After the big man and Gus get caught trying to get into the train and stealing supplies, they're briefly captured by poachers, then rescued by Team Gen Z. Team Gen Z saves Gus, but captures the big man because he has a mark on him, which means he's captured hybrids in the past. But Gus sees the big man as a father figure and doesn't want him to get hurt. And Bear, who's their leader,
She's the leader.
then makes this whole speech about protecting hybrids and decides to spare the big man's life to avoid hurting Gus. We then find out that Team Gen Z gives absolutely no fucks about Bear's long ass speech, so Bear's girlfriend Tiger, who the show implies had a thing for Bear, because it's 2021 and you need to have at least 1 or 2 LGBTQ characters if you want to greenlight a show. So Tiger tells Team Gen Z to release an actual tiger and kill the big man, which sets us up for a big reveal. Gus gets in front of the big man and tells the tiger to not hurt him, which actually works.
What?
We as the audience, and so did everyone in that scene, just found out that Gus has the ability to talk to animals. The problem is that Gus's ability to talk to animals isn't hinted at or referenced early on in the show. It also doesn't actually impact the rest of the story, despite it being a pretty big deal that a 10-year-old has the ability to talk to animals. In episode 7, which in my opinion is the best episode of the show, we find out that Gus wasn't born the natural way, and he was a lab experiment all along.
What?
Gus realizes that this means that he doesn't have a real mom or dad and loses both his sense of belonging and his sense of purpose. He has no idea what to do other than run, and eventually gets captured by some poachers with a much bigger budget than the previous poachers we saw in episode 2. Gus gets locked up with other hybrids to get experimented on by the better half of Team Browntown, Dr. Singh. This is the first time in the entire season that Gus meets other hybrids, and for the first time probably in his entire short life, Gus feels like this is where he belongs, in a cage with other hybrids. The show concludes with Gus fulfilling his need to belong in a pretty depressing way. But the problem I had with Gus was how his unique connection with deer, where they're able to sense when he's in trouble, that was introduced to us back in episode 2, doesn't actually influence the story. And his ability to communicate with animals, which should have been a game changer for the show, is only used in one scene and never even referenced ever again. These feel like plot threads and tacked on character abilities that are created along the way to make Gus's character seem more interesting than he actually is. I understand that there's a second season and there's a possibility that all these plot threads are addressed later on, but for season 1 it seems like these abilities are being introduced then stripped away. One character in the show named Amy that I haven't talked about at all in this video repeatedly says that hybrids are better than us.
They're better than us.
But we never actually see what makes them better than us. When I look at Gus, I don't see a very special child with supernatural powers that can save the world. I just see a regular kid that kinda looks like a deer and wants to feel like he belongs. And maybe that was the whole point. Let me know what you guys thought about Sweet Tooth. I thought it was pretty entertaining. I really liked the soundtrack, the visuals, and the dynamic between Bear, the big man, and Gus. And if you haven't already, consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell notification icon for more content. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.